also lost the chat while let me see if I can find the chat. So in case anybody has any questions, I've got that going. Look at us. We are cooking with Crisco here. Right. And I will minimize that. That I got it. And for whatever reason, this doesn't want to I'm moving that out. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
I find it easier rather than trying to open up the actual presentation. All right, cool. So you guys are not in the home stretch yet, but you're about to enter it, right? Yeah, like probably November, mid-November, the pressure and craziness of exams is going to hit your school with a fury like a tornado. All right. People are going to be going absolutely ballistic with their concerns about how to write a law school exam, what they're supposed to be looking for. And what I like to do, and we do this in October for a reason, is because I want you guys to be prepared for that. So before I even start and for the recording, I apologize in advance. My wife and I made the very irresponsible decision of getting 2 pandemic dogs. That I have, she's a flight attendant for JetBlue, and she's usually here when I do these and is able to corral them and take them out. But she's flying today, and I have them, hopefully occupied with enough treats and toys in the kitchen that it will, it'll keep them quiet for a bit. But it might turn out like it sounds like there's like a giant dog fight going on in my kitchen, and I promise you, no one's getting hurt. But it might be a little bit distracting. So I might have to pop and take a little intermission, take care of them, and then come back. But the reason why I like to do this in October is because, before, as you're starting your outlines, and hopefully all of you guys have started the outlining process. I want you guys doing it with an eye towards what is the, what's the end goal here in terms of your exams. Now, how far I go back on this, in terms of explaining to you what the various parts of the exam writing success tactics. This is really the meat of the lecture, but I do like to start out with some of the things as a reminder as to what your goals are here. Talking about exam taking in college versus exam taking in law school. Understanding what a lawyer's job is and a law student's job is. Talk about the parts of the examination, and then walk through what the professors are looking for and how you want to make the professor's job a lot easier. All right. Does that make sense before we, and I'll try to do that pretty quickly because hopefully you'll remember this from law preview. But if not, you didn't have any opportunities to ask questions about this previously. So, what I'll do is, open this up to questions, and I do encourage questions. Like you can't screw me up with this. So feel free to break in and just say, Don, you're making absolutely no sense. And I'll say, well, it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday. What do you expect? All right. You get what you pay for, people. But I'll try to rephrase it and make it clear. All right. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, perfect. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Good. All right. Love it. All right. So let's talk about, college versus high school, or high school and college, right? High school, like think about it, like high school and college, really you're rewarded for regurgitation and memorization, right? You're rewarded for memorizing what dates there were for certain things, or who certain people were, right? College exams a little bit more in depth, but not really all that much. I mean, you could still memorize stuff. Excuse me, I'm on the phone. They ask you a little bit more in-depth questions, right? Like, not only who they are and when it happened, but what it meant to the evolution of a particular subject, whether it's psychology or history or whatever you're studying. All right. The big piece about college and high school is you could get by, and probably the reason why you're in law school right now is you're smart enough to get by with memorizing large amounts of information and then regurgitating them back in a format that shows the professor you were there, you were listening, right? In high school and college, like, at least if your career was anything like mine, as an undergrad, you probably could get by without doing a lot of reading, right? You really just wanted to show up, take really good notes, or if you were, attending class all that often, getting a friend who took really good notes, right? And, memorizing their notes, going in there and regurgitating back, hey, professor, this is what you told us. And she's going to mark off and say, okay, Mahi has given us, given me 85% of the material that I taught her this semester. Therefore, Mahi gets a B or a B plus, right? In law school, it's a lot different, right? In law school, you're not being asked to memorize. I mean, obviously you are, right? You're being asked to memorize the black letter law, understand and memorize the elements of the law, but that's not where you're gaining your points, right? What you're being asked to do as, on a law school exam is apply what you've learned, right? So, as you see on this slide, they're talking about, psychology and, what you learn from Freud and Pavlov, and make predictions when you interview Joseph Stalin. Good luck. Or, Vladimir Putin, if we want to use a more current day sociopath. So what law schools, what you're doing in law school is really collecting a lot of information throughout the semester, right? You're reading cases, you're, reinforcing those, the cases and the rules and the holdings that come out of those cases with other supplemental materials, whether it's an outline, whether it's flashcards, whatever it is, right? And throughout the semester, you're collecting these tools, right? You're collecting these rules, right? And then, on the exam, what, a lot of your classmates usually expect is, hey, I will be able to regurgitate and, gather points by just doing an information dump. And your professor's like, no, honestly, it's not, we believe you. We believe that if you're in law school, you're smart enough to memorize. So we're not going to test your ability to memorize. We're going to test your ability to apply what you learned. And that's what true mastery is, right? If you're able to take what you learned and apply it to something that you've never seen before and make predictions, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? And that's what a professor's, trying to do in a law school exam. I mean, think about it, right? Your client will never ever walk into, Diana, how many clients do you have who come in and are like, hey, I think I violated, the Securities Act of 1934. And you're like, oh, okay, well, as you probably then know, the Securities Act of 1934 says, da, 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 da. And they're like, oh, yes, thank you. Okay, fantastic. Usually what happens is, your client comes into your office with a story, right? Either things that they've done, things that they want to do, right? Or things that they, that have happened, or, it might be a disjointed story. Like if you talk to my, we're dealing with some health issues with my parents, right? And they're octogenarians, they're in their 80s. And if you talk to my mom right now, like, what you're like, hey mom, what did the doctor say about dad? You get a story that as she continues to talk, it's as if she's going to spin off the face of the earth. All right. She's spiraling so much. Right. But what, and that's not unique to my mother, although she probably does need some serious psychiatric help. All right. This woman is crazy and she raised me, and therefore, I'm crazy and passing that down to my kids. But, for, anybody who's visiting an attorney, it's like visiting a doctor. You don't go to an attorney, I mean, oftentimes when things are great, right? You're going to an attorney with a problem that you're predicting is going to have an impact on you in your life, even when it's a great thing. Like, hey, we're getting married. Can you write us a prenup, right? Yeah, those prenups, pretty stressful, right? You want to see people like, sit across the desk from you and like spiral out of their seats. That's what, like, so when a client comes into your office, they may not be telling you the story that you need to know in order to answer the question. They might be telling you a story that starts 15 or 20 years before and then gives you all the information. And you're there sitting there as the attorney saying, okay, what are the legally significant facts, right? How do I help this person resolve this problem? Okay. So as you're reading the hypothetical fact pattern, that's what the professor is trying to replicate, is a convoluted, crazy fact pattern where actors are doing all kinds of different things, which may or may not, create rights and liabilities under the various causes of actions or defenses that you guys are learning throughout the semester. So that's a big difference from how you've been tested before, right? In high school and college, your professor was essentially saying, show me you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, show me that you were listening, right? And in law school, your professor's like, I don't care if you were listening. I believe you were listening, all right? Show me you can apply what we learned, right? Big, big difference on exams, all right? So yeah, so here are some things that a lawyer does, and again, you have these slides, so I wanted you to have your so you had them in front of you, so in case I don't hit every piece, you understand at least the context of what I'm getting at here. But for the most part, this is what a lawyer's job does. And again, when you look at thinking about what a lawyer does, right? Identifying disputes and relationships between people, right? Identifying issues that arise out of those relationships. Certain relationships create certain duties, right? Where you're learning that probably in your torts class right now, all right? And then applying legal rules to the disputes to identify a client's rights and obligations, all right? The same exact thing that a lawyer does when they're listening as they're planning, strategizing, thinking about a litigation, evaluating a defense, or understanding a contingency that if they raise this defense, we'll have this answer or these arguments. You're doing the same thing as a law student, right? You're basically just playing lawyer for the day on your exam, all right? So anybody who thinks that simply sitting down with their outline and memorizing the black letter law is going to be enough is sorely mistaken about what the goal is on this exam, right? So I'm going to stop there. Any questions before I continue? Don't be shy, guys. Oh, Alexis, you're new. When did you pop in here? Oh,
I popped in about
Sapphire?
10 minutes ago.
Okay, great. Where are you going to law school?
I'm going to U of D and U of D in Michigan.
Oh, excellent. Fantastic. And how about you, Sapphire? Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, my name's Sapphire, and I go to law school at University of Montana.
Wow, awesome. What's it like out there? Jesus Christ, I don't think I've ever met a student, like, and this is sounds kind of crazy, but like, I don't think I've ever met a student from University of Montana.
I like it. It's a small law school. I chose it for their American Indian law program.
Good for you. I love it. Were you from out, and forgive me, is that like considered the West? Like, is Montana West or Midwest or what is it? Northwest?
Montana's, or we consider it the West. I'm from Montana. I'm from the Rocky Boys Reservation, the Little Shell tribe, or I'm Little Shell and Chippewa Creek.
Oh, wow. Cool. Very cool. Well, listen, every time my wife has gotten me into watching Yellowstone. That's Montana, right? Like the television show?
Yeah.
I don't know if you
it's Yellowstone's in Montana and Wyoming.
Okay. Yeah, I've never once like questioned like whether like my manliness until I started watching that show. And then I concluded like I am not a man. Like those are real men, right? Like those are like I want to like and I'm unabashedly will say like I want to like curl up in Rip's lap and like feel safe for a day. I want friends like that. So I looking at that show, the beauty of like where you live and where you're at is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm kind of jealous. So any questions on what we've covered so far for what you've heard? Anybody? And don't be shy. No? All right, I'll press on. Let's see here. All right. So one of the things that I do want everybody to remember is this being. I'm going to try to minimize this again. This being your first set of exams. I really truly want you guys to get familiar with things that other students are just going to gloss over and not think about, right? One of the big things is the parts of the examination and the general directions. All right, this sounds so basic, right? This sounds so stupid. Like, Don, we're in law school. Don't tell me that I have to read the directions on the exam. But when the exam proctor says you may begin, right? You're going to hear pages flip right past the general directions, right? People are going to instantly start clicking on their keyboards, and you're going to feel a sense of like, whoa, wait, I'm already behind. Everyone's already gathering points. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is twofold. One is, in preparation for your exams, I want you to get some old exams from your professors and get intimately familiar with their exam structure and the directions. All right. Professors are like everybody else. All right. They are creatures of habit. They have demanding personal lives. They have spouses that they argue with. They have kids that are pains in the asses. All right. And I can almost guarantee you that when your professor sets a directions for her first exam that she's ever drafted in 1998, it hasn't changed in 2022. She sticks with the same format, and she sticks with the same general time frame, general instructions. All right, but as I like to sort of and I'll get to this towards the end. These instructions are guidelines for you, but they're also guidelines for her, right? You really want to truly, if you're looking to give your professor what she's looking for and make her feel really comfortable that your exam is going to give her a very good experience, I need you to put yourself in her position. And these instructions, whether it's the materials that you can reference, the instructions that she's giving you for time, the amount of time or space that you can write, are really procedural things, right? That make her job easier, right? So by you avoiding and sort of just glossing over and not paying attention to these questions or these instructions, I'm afraid that you're going to give your professor something that she's not looking for, right? And I'll hit this later on, but your professor, when you're writing your exam, your image of her is December 23rd, right? It's right before the holidays. There's a bunch of unwrapped gifts someplace in a corner that she's worried about. She's got a party of people coming to her house the following evening for maybe Christmas Eve or some kind of holiday party. And she's got to sit down and write and grade exams. And it's 2:00 in the morning, and the registrar is like, making sure like, hey, these have to be in by the 28th. You have to get these done. This is like the big part of her job that every professor, if you ask them, universally hates. Okay, so these instructions are there to make her job easier, and also to key you in on what your job is on the exam. All right. So I strongly encourage you to get familiar with the professor's exams beforehand and their instructions. Obviously, the questions won't be the same, but you will be shocked because they might have a 1995 exam of your professor, depending on how long she's been teaching. That might be kind of old. But there might be an older exam on reserve in your library, and you're going to find out that she hasn't changed it in 20 years. Okay, so don't be surprised by that. But obviously, we're not putting all of our faith in the fact that she did it in the past, she'll do it in the future. When you get to the exam, you're going to identify how much time do I have? What materials can I reference? What instructions do I have to follow? What space, what spacing do I have? All right. So let's go. Sorry. Obviously, you're going to have different types of questions this is very basic, like your multiple choice questions. If you haven't seen these, there's a bunch of books out there that you should be practicing with. If your professor has you working on multiple choice questions, or it tells you that on the format of the exam, there will be multiple choice problems, be sure to go out and get some multi-state bar exam practice questions on your particular topic. What they're probably trying to do is just get you used to taking a multi-state bar exam fact pattern and dissecting it using multiple choice questions. Okay. But the format is pretty much always the same, right? There's a very, very short hypothetical fact pattern. There's a call of the question, right, that you'll identify, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then they'll ask you for the best response. And oftentimes, the best response is really hard to pick out, right? You're oftentimes really able to get it down to one or two, answers. But from there, you really have to know and have a mastery of how the law is applied and what exceptions they're trying to test here when identifying which is the absolute best response. So multiple choice questions, not so much like, like the questions that you may have gotten in undergrad where there was a clear best answer. A lot of the times there's probably two, maybe even three really good answers. But because of the fact pattern and the way it's written, there's a nuance there that your professor is testing not only the general rule, but possibly an exception to the rule, right? Making one answer better, much better than the other. All right. The other type of question that you're probably going to see is a hypothetical fact pattern. And it's an essay exam. And we've talked about this at Law Preview. We're going to talk about how to dissect it in a moment. But again, long hypo, the thought behind it is the client comes into your office, it's a little old lady, she drops her purse on her knees, she starts telling you this crazy ass story like my mom would tell you right now about my dad's doctors, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, like tell me, like I got to figure out what's going on with this client, and you're identifying legally significant facts. All right, now legally significant facts, and I'm actually in the process of rescripting Law Preview, and one thing that I hit during during the first taping of Law Preview is that when you're going through the black letter law, every element that you encounter is merely a fact, right? I mean, like you're going to law school, but the more I think about it, and the more like I really dissect what's going on in a law school classroom, and even in the law generally, like they should call it fact school, right? Because you're basically learning what facts create different rights and liabilities, right? What elements, if met, right, impose a obligation, a legal obligation, or impose some kind of liability on somebody, or what facts, if met, will then show that a defense or a justification has occurred, right? So these hypotheticals are written in such a way that there are going to be facts that should clearly jump out at you as, holy Christ, that sounds a lot like bodily contact in the battery, in the cause of action for battery, right? Or that sounds a lot like something that is harmful or offensive, right, as an element for battery. You're going through, when you're looking at legally significant facts, what I think is a good strategy or a good way to be doing it is thinking about all these causes of actions, thinking about all these defenses, anything that's going to have an element to it, right? So it could be a cause of action, it could be a defense, it could be a test or a standard, right, to prove the existence of one of those elements, right? If you can't show, like if you can't otherwise give me truth-telling drugs, how can you really know my intent? Well, the law says, well, if you can prove these facts, we can presume that Don had the requisite intent, right? Those facts that you have to prove, yet another legal standard test that is a question of law that you're learning. But you should be reading these hypothetical fact patterns with an eye towards what elements have we learned this semester in law school, and what facts, trigger certain causes of action. Does that make sense? right? Is that how you're picturing, what you're learning right now in law school? Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't make sense, like, please tell me now, because I'm rescripting law preview sort of on that basis of, having, students worry less about the causes of action and more about the elements that comprise those causes of action, because that's what you're going to be provided with. You're going to be provided with things that, thanks, Matt, I appreciate that. So many students walk into exam and they're like, show me a battery, show me an assault, show me, negligent infliction of emotional stress. And all they get are the elements of that. And you're like, well, that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for the facts that comprise the cause of action or the defense or the standard or the test. All right. So we'll talk about law school exam questions in a minute. Things that I want to point out that every section will have usually will have obviously the time period which the professor thinks that you should be using to answer this question. Sorry. The hypothetical fact pattern, and again, I'm going to talk about this at length in terms of later on when we talk about the 5 sections of how to answer a law school question, the call of the question. So we'll talk about that in a moment. All right. So this is interesting, right? Because you're trying to figure out what's going to get you a top grade, right? What does your professor want? So your professor wants certain things and doesn't want other things. All right. She doesn't really care much about your knowledge of the cases. All right. She assumes that you've attended class, you've come prepared, you're having read these cases. She's not really all that worried about the cases that you've read. All right. And it makes sense, right? Like you're reading cases that that probably or presumably are settled key points of law, right? The chestnut cases, the foundational cases in law school. It doesn't make much sense for you to memorize the case and the holding and the thing, the rule coming out of that case. Well, maybe not the rules. Let me step back. But the case itself is not that important because of stare decisis, you probably won't see many of these cases ever again, right? They'll take a different form, right? But they're not going to look the same. Like Pearson versus Post, like there's probably not a lot of people arguing over fox pelts, right, in the Hamptons anymore, right? It might be like an uninhabited stretch of beach in Montauk where they're arguing over like diamonds, right, or whatever's in style, Lululemon pants for men, right? If that's the big thing that people argue over, but they're not arguing over fox pelts, right? But so the case of Pearson versus Post doesn't really matter all that much, right? But what does matter is the rule that comes out of it and how it's applied in future cases that you may or may never see, right? So think about Pearson versus Post. I think we covered this in law preview, but if you didn't know, one of the most recent sightings of Pearson versus Post by a court was the Barry Bonds home run, ball back 15 years ago when he hit he passed a home run record, and the ball got hit out into the field, out into the stands, and one person had it and dropped it, and then it was bouncing around, and then another person had it and held it up and got it, and then another person wrestled it out of their hands, right? And there was a lawsuit about who owns the Barry Bonds home run ball, which was worth $2 million, right? Or maybe we could even say with Aaron Judge right now in New York and his home run, what he just did. The guy who caught that $2 million baseball, first of all, great retirement plan to show up at that Yankee game. Jesus Christ. But if he had dropped it and there was a fight, the judge in the Barry Bonds case was like, hey, you know what this looks like? Pearson versus Post. It's like the person who owns the ball, who has the ball. It's not how much you try for the ball. It's who the person who has that bloody, sweaty pelt in their hand. And that's the same thing as a baseball. It's like a free and natural animal. So knowing the rules that come out of the cases, but not the cases themselves, right? They're there to illustrate the rules and help the professor talk you through that court's reasoning, right? And then apply the reasoning to separate cases that you've never even thought of, right? And when you get to the exam, the reason why the case itself won't matter is because if the exam is done right, the professor isn't testing you on fox pelts in the Hamptons, right? They're testing you on baseballs, things that the court wasn't even thinking about when it wrote its decision, all right? What they want you to do is go through the fact pattern, identify elements. Those are legally significant facts. Every time I say the word element or your professor says the word element, strike it out of your vocabulary or replace it with legally significant fact, all right? Ability to spot issues arising out of disputes, all right? So, that's going to be, where the party has a problem proving one of their legally significant facts, right? That is an issue, right? An issue, when a professor says, what is the issue in this case? It usually pertains to a party having a difficult time explaining how a legally significant fact is present, right? And then what does the court do? They're like, oh yeah, we agree with you. Let's develop a test for that, right? Let's set up a rule or a general rule or legal test for that. Or they might say like, yeah, well, that's your problem. Like that, if you can't prove it, you lose, right? And then they want you to go through your analysis, right? And we're going to talk about factual analysis, legal analysis, and policy analysis. And then finally, your professors really, really, really want concision. They don't want you saying a lot of words, all right? But they want really good organization, all right? So again, you're thinking about your professor. It's, when she's grading your exam, she's in her blue terry cloth bathrobe. There's a pot of coffee next to her. She's got her bunny slippers on. It's 2:00 in the morning and she picked up your exam. You want your exam to be well organized, concise, hit all the points so she can feel good about being like, yep, this person gets it. Here's the A. Let's move on to the next joker. Oh, wow, look at this exam. It's a mess. All right. And understand, organization and concision are helpful to her because she's going to read every word, right? Your professor, the last thing, I apologize. 1 second. Now this, you get to meet my dogs. All right. So hold on 1 second. Dolores, you are the worst. All right. You got to behave. You got to behave now. All right. Okay. So Dolores, there's a rabbit who lives in our backyard, and this dog is like a mental patient. She sits by the windows. Like I told my wife, I'm like, the only thing she's missing is like a pack of cigarettes and like an ashtray full of cigarette butts. Like she'll sit at the window right there, looking out the window for hours a day, just waiting for the rabbit to come by. And then when it does, all hell breaks loose. So I apologize. Okay. So clear on what the professors want, right? They want really good organization, concision, and then they're testing you not on your knowledge of the rules, but your ability to apply those rules. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right. Let me get back here. All right. What they don't want, conclusions. All right. So this is crazy, right? Because this is what you got rewarded for in law school or in college, right? Is coming up with the right conclusion. All right. Most of these answers don't have a right conclusion, right? They can easily come out one way or the other. All right. So don't spend your time trying to prove a conclusion, right? It's oftentimes really easy to come back and say, hey, the conclusion, professor, I don't know. I mean, this could go either way. If I'm a judge, I'm going to struggle with this. If this party says this, is able to prove this, then I think party A should win. But if party B is able to say X, Y, and Z or post this defense, then party B should win, right? I don't know. I mean, like party B should win, but it could easily change for me. That's fine. That's fine, right? Your professor is fine with that, right? But they're also not, fine with simply saying there's the conclusion, right? If you're going to state a conclusion, it's got to be backed up with facts, right? So here, he's mean. right? Sure, he's mean, right? That's a conclusion. But he's mean because he kicks dogs and spits on children. Yeah, that's like showing you facts about how and why that person is mean, right? So don't just give conclusions backed with facts, okay? But oftentimes, again, don't feel bad if you're like, hey, I'm on the fence here. I don't know who should win. If you're on the fence there, you're on the right track to getting an A, all right? Feel good about that. They're not looking for great grammar and spelling. They know that these are time pressured exams, especially if you're, if it's not a, even if it is a take home exam, a 24-hour take home, which I think are cruel. But if you're sitting in a classroom and you're typing away, and you're, unable to, properly, grammar check or spell check your thing, that's fine. That's fine. All right. They're not looking for jokes, right? I know that your image of your professor at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're like, hey, maybe I'll wake her up with some jokes or some flattery. Oh, professor, by the way, phenomenal course. You loved it. You killed it every day. I loved it. Not looking for that. They're really just looking for you to see whether you can hit and move, organize an answer, and explain your reasoning. Okay. Right. Things that you can do to make your professor's job easier. Again, thinking about your professor, right? You're writing for an audience of one at this point. Use a computer. Eric Talley, who's a contracts professor at Columbia, taught for about 10 years for Law Preview. And he was like the rare person who went to law school who really was good at math. And he went back and analyzed all his old exams for 10 years. And found out that people who used a computer got a markedly better grade on his exam. And he thought he was being objective, but he's like, it has to simply be the fact that I could read their answer. All right. If you're not able to use a computer, you don't have a computer, they're for whatever reason not letting you use a computer, do not write in script. You have to write, you have to print. All right. And again, I said this before, your professor will read every word of your exam, because your professor knows how important these exams are to your future, right? And they're not stupid, right? They know that because of their importance, you are going to likely be someone who's going to argue your exam, right? If you get a grade that you don't think you deserve, right? You go into law school because probably, since you were a child, your mother or your dad or somebody said, you're such a good arguer, Sapphire, you should be a lawyer, right? And you're like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll go to law school. And professors know that. So the last thing your professor wants is you contesting your exam, because if by chance you're right, and you deserved a higher grade, what happens then, and this is embarrassing, and they don't tell you this, but the first year professors have to sit down and convene a meeting among all the first year professors, and you as your professor has to come forward and say, I screwed up grading Matthew's exam. All right. Here's how. And because the only way that you would get, anybody would know this is because the student received their grade. Everyone's received their grade. So if we bump up Matthew, right, into the top 10% because of my screw up, it might knock out Alexis, right? Or it might knock out Mahi. So these professors do not want to be called on the carpet for, for a grading error, because you as a, precocious but lovable first year law student showed them how they screwed up. Okay. So they're going to read every single word. And if it's not something that's clear to read, it's going to be struggle, and they're going to freaking hate you for it. Right. So make them love you, right? Type. If you don't type, print, don't write in script. All right. Use a large readable font. That makes sense. Double space. If you're writing in a blue book, if you're doing it the old fashioned way, double space, so you can always go back and insert something later on in a line above or below what you're trying to write. So you can insert an idea when you go back and reread it. One of the other things that drives people crazy are these, and I work with professors all the time, right? If you're going to use shorthand, they expect it and they're fine with it. Provide them with some kind of a key, right? OTOH doesn't mean anything to them, right? It might be something like that means something to you, right? One thing, somebody wrote one time, one professor was telling me they wrote for cable, and the whole exam was all about for cable, right? And the professor was like, I don't know what this is, and it was foreseeable, right? It was the shorthand, and he's like, oh, okay, like yes, please, that would have been really helpful, for me to know what you're doing. So for whatever shorthand that you're writing, be sure to provide your professor with a key, and not just an overall key like, professor, on page 1 of my exam, here's my key. All right, go through and write your answer to every hypothetical that you're going to answer, and then at the end put a key at the top, right, of that particular question, right? So they don't have to flip through to be like, where is this key? Because another thing you won't know is your professors won't grade they won't grade your exam all the way through, right? They may, if there are 3 essay questions, they will grade everybody in the class on essay question number 1, right? In order to understand who got the best grade on essay number 1, all right? And then they'll go to essay number 2. They'll just start. So if you put a key at the top of essay number 1, but not at the top of essay number 2, they're not going to see it, all right? So definitely put a key up there. Elegant variation. This is really frustrating. Like, use one way to say something, and then just stick with it. And please be concise, right? So breach of contract versus failure to tender performance required under correct. Okay, please don't do that. All right. But be proactive in terms of answering a question the same way, even though it sounds remote or automatic and mechanical, and rote. I meant to say rote, not remote. It's okay. We're not going for great grammar, great prose here. We're going for, do you understand the concept? Can you take the rules that you learned throughout the semester, apply it to a hypothetical fact pattern that you've never seen before, all right? And then provide an answer, okay? Any questions before we hit the next thing? No? Look at me, I'm cruising along. Am I really that clear on a Saturday morning? All right, I feel good. I feel really good now. You're making me feel really good that I'm this clear. Okay. Macro time management. All right. You want to understand, how much time you have for the overall exam, right? 3 hours, and then also, within each section of the exam, understand how you're going to, analyze this question. This is the biggest, this sounds stupid, right? But the first 2 steps of, of our answering exam questions, effective time management and read the call to question first. Those are the 2 skills that, frankly, if you can do that, you are beating 85% of your classmates, all right? Because there's going to be a large number, and you'll be shocked by how many people you talk to at the end of the exam, if you choose to do so, which I don't recommend doing, who tell you they didn't finish the exam, right? Or they answered the wrong question, right? You hear that a lot, right? So what I want you to do first off is not find yourself in a position to answer the wrong question, or not answer the wrong question. First off, not have enough time to answer the question. By finishing the exam, I guarantee you are putting yourselves probably in front of about 15% of the people who won't finish the exam. Maybe 20% of the people won't finish the exam. All right. These are really, really tough questions that you could spend hours, days, weeks analyzing, right? If you look at the exam questions that I wrote, or answers that I wrote for the Law Preview book, I mean, Christ, like I spent weeks drafting those answers, right? To make sure that they were right. But you're not afforded weeks, you're afforded 60 minutes. All right. So your professors are going to give you, recommended time. That is the recommended time that you want to spend on that exam, on that question, right? Another thing that I find a lot of students do it's just a senseless error, right? Is they have a 3-hour exam with 3 different, sections worth 60 minutes each, right? Okay. Your professor is telling you this is worth 60 minutes, right? If everybody else in the class is spending 60 minutes on this, all right, and you're going to borrow time, let's say, from other parts of the exam, you're going to spend 70 or 80 minutes on that first question. Well, you've just discounted how much time you can spend on your second and third question, right? And I just told you, these professors are not, the hope is, right? And you're thinking like, oh, okay, if I can lull my professor into like, I'll give her a freaking great answer on essay number 1, right? And then by the time she gets to essay number 2 and essay number 3, she'll know I'm just running out of time. But I got it. I'm really smart and she's going to love me for this, right? Well, if your professor is reading essay number 1 and then essay number 1 for everybody else in the class, all right, and then is reading essay number 2 and for everybody else in the class, and essay number, she's grading you not on your performance of essay. She doesn't remember, right? And she doesn't even know who you are, right? There's a number associated with your name. It's anonymously graded, right? So she doesn't even know that this is Diana and she's her favorite student, and Diana's been bringing her an apple every day, right? And Diana was Diana was a hand popper, right? She was always in the front, like answering questions, professor. Look, she says no, but I've done some research, all right? I've talked to your classmates then. And so like, even though you were the favorite, right? Like she had a mug that said, I love my torts professor. And that's what she would bring, to class every day, right? Even though she was the class favorite, the professor doesn't know who Diana is. You're grading this anonymously, right? So your tactic, or a tactic of borrowing time from later parts of the exam to answer a question earlier in the exam, is foolish. It's stupid, right? And also, it's not giving the professor what she wants. She's telling you, you've got 60 minutes to answer this question. Answer the question. All right. Another thing that I think you should also do is, and this is something that your classmates aren't probably thinking about, because this is kind of sophisticated, right? Is I want you guys to flip through every part of the exam when you first get it, right? And identify how many points you have in total, right? How many minutes that she's asking you for, right? Oftentimes, this is kind of crazy. You might have a 3-hour exam and she might have 60 minutes on the first question, 60 minutes on the second question, and then a 30-minute multiple choice question. Well, that's 2.5 hours. She's built in an extra half an hour for you. Well, that's helpful to know, right? So now you get to spread those extra half hours, you prorate them over the other parts of the exam, right? But if you don't know that, if you're like, just gonna hit question 1, treat question 1 as your first question for 1 hour, and then question 2 for 1 hour, and question 3 for 1 hour, or 30 minutes, you get to the end and you're like, holy Christ, I have an extra half an hour. You look up at the clock and you're like, okay, I wish I knew that going in. Well, you could know that going in, right? And I'm going to tell you how to do it is add up all of the parts of the exam. Okay. If your professor is, fancy, right? And tells you, I'm going to show you how many points these are worth. I'm not going to tell you how much time you have for them. All she's telling you is that I want you to convert points into minutes. Okay. So if you have a 3-hour exam, you have 180 minutes. And you'll know that by the time period, usually on the first page of the instructions. All right. Then what you have to do is add up all the possible points, right? That for every section. So say there's a 10-point multiple choice questions, there's 40 points for short answer questions, and then there's a 50-point question. That's an essay question. You have 100 possible points. You divide, 180 minutes by 100, and you get 1.8 minutes per point, right? This is, I know this sounds like crazy math, and I know, but you need to do this, right? And you need to get really good at this. And this is where coming in with your a knowledge of what your professor's exam is going to look like. If she's structuring these essays not based on time but on points, you need to know how much time you're going to devote to every point, because then what you're going to do is take 1.8 and times it by 10, and you're only going to spend 18 minutes on the multiple choice question because it's worth 10 points, right? If you're going to spend the 40-point question, you're going to take the 1.8 times 40, and you're going to get 72. All right. And the same thing with the 50-point question, you're going to spend 90 minutes, right? That's easy math. That's basically half of 100, right? Half of 180 minutes is 90 minutes. Okay. But do you see how somebody like who's not well educated on the importance of time can really screw up and run out of time because they're misappropriating their time. Especially if you're spending, if the essay question, the 50-point essay question comes at the end, and you just go through here and you're doing your best, you're doing your absolute best on on the multiple choice and the short answer, which collectively are worth half the exam, but you spend 3/4 of your time doing it. Well, you left only 25% of the time left to do something that is worth half of the points on your exam. This is silly, right? These are senseless errors that your classmates will make, and I promise you that if you follow this step, you won't, right? And you'll always have enough time to finish the exam. All right. Let's see what our next thing is here. So that's the macro. That's sort of understanding the time that you have in a big picture. And this is the last thing you're going to do is spend a lot of time, waste any time budgeting how much time you have. Okay. This is a process that, when we're talking about, how you're going to break down how much your time is worth, you're going to do this in 2 or 3 minutes, right? But you're also at the same time going to hear people clicking away on their keys and papers shuffling, and you're going to feel the pressure of people getting out ahead of you. Don't worry, it's fine. All right, let them go run their race. Slow and steady wins this race. All right. So spending the 1, 2, 3 minutes to actually figure out how much time you have to take the exam and breaking it down like this is going to help you earn points later on. I promise you. Okay. So that's the macro piece. The micro piece is understanding how much time you're going to spend within each question, how to budget your time there, right? So for the typical essay question, I apologize. Hey guys, can we not? Walter, come here. Sorry. If you're looking to bet on any dog in the dog fight, it's a small one who'll win. All right. He's scrappy. He's small, but he's scrappy. But so for every essay question, I strongly recommend you spend 1/4 of your time reading, analyzing, and outlining the question. Okay. We'll talk about that in a moment and how you're going to do that. 1/4 of the time. So 15 minutes out of a 60-minute question, and then 45 minutes actually writing the exam answer. All right. Again, it's going to kill you inside, right? As you hear everybody else clicking away on their keyboards. All right. But you are going to slow and steady. Look, I began this question at 1:30. All right. I have to begin writing at 1:45, and I have to end at 2:30. Okay. That's how you're going to budget your time, and you're going to put it right at the top of the question. So as you're doing these questions, every part is going to have a start time, if it's an essay question, when you're going to begin writing and when you have to end. If it's multiple choice, it's going to be a start time and it's going to be an end time. All right. But you're also on a multiple choice question going to know how much time you have for each question. Right. So if you have, 30 minutes to do 10 questions, then that's, 3 minutes a question. Okay. Make sense? Yes? Good? Diane, am I making sense here, or are they just being polite? Oh, look. this is great because my midterms made me feel like I needed a drool cup in a short bus. Great, awesome. So I'm glad. All right. I'm glad that first of all, I mean, that's the value of a midterm, right? And that's the reason why most midterms are either worth nothing or very little a part of your grade, because it's less to show you what you've learned, and it's more to prepare you for the exercise that's coming up, right? So the fact that you had that experience already is fine. But now just really trying to understand and master some very, very simple techniques is going to really put you in a position to demonstrate how much you've learned and how well you can apply the law, right? And I'm a big believer that most law students walk into the exam, and I'm saying 95%. There's 5% of your class that is just going to check out. They're going to get overwhelmed. They're not going to do the work. They're going to stop reading. They're going to figure out they shouldn't have gone to law school, and that's it's an expensive way to find yourself, right? The other 90% of the class are going to have done the work and done a really good job at learning and memorizing black letter law, right? What distinguishes the bottom 90% of the class from the top of the 10% of the class is what they do with that information, right? And simple steps like managing your time, reading the call to question, how you analyze a hypothetical fact pattern, those things are going to place you head and shoulders above your uninitiated classmates. And I said this during law preview, and I feel compelled to say it again right now. You have an advantage right now that is going to quickly dissipate, right? Having taken law preview, you understand what professors are looking for, how to manage your time, how to read the cases, how to understand the importance of the rationale and the reasoning coming out of those cases, and how to apply that stuff on exams. By February of next year, a lot of your classmates are going to be like, holy cow, I've been doing this wrong. Now I know what I need to do. All right. And they'll turn it on and do much better second semester. All right. But for right now, you have a distinct advantage over your classmates that if you're able to pad your GPA and do really well your first semester of law school, it is damn near impossible to catch you mathematically. All right. If you do well your first semester, by the time your classmates figure out what they weren't doing correctly and how they need to make that change, half of your credits are already booked, all right, from the first semester. All right. It is really hard for them to play catch up against you. All right. So coming strong at the advantage that I have of law preview, hey, get off of him. All right. The advantage that I have against law, that I love about law preview is, you're really walking in with a distinct advantage over people who are completely uninitiated. They're smart, right? You're sitting in a classroom full of people and you're like, whoa, that person's smart. That person's not. That person might need a drool cup. All right. Maybe it's Matthew. But so you're surrounded by smart people, right? But like why do some smart people do some really dumb things? It's because they don't know, right? They don't have a plan and they're sort of thrashing about. But you're not going to find yourself in that position. So I strongly, strongly encourage you to just max it out this semester, because by the time second semester rolls around and people do start to figure out what the game is all about, hopefully you've padded yourself with enough of a GPA that they can't catch you, right? And there's also, frankly, a psychology that is really, really, really hard to overcome if you didn't do well first semester, right? For the and this isn't applying to you because I'm assuming that you're all gonna crush it and do well. But like if you don't, right, now you have to reinvent yourself, right? Especially if you don't have any kind of resource like law preview to tell you what to do. You have to reinvent yourself, and you're sort of trying to do so in a black box. You don't know what the top students did in order to earn those top grades. So now you have to thrash about, try something new, and reinvent yourself. Psychologically, that's pretty hard, right? And it's really easy for somebody who did well to maintain. because you did it during the hardest semester, the first semester when everybody else is so confused, right? And you rewarded with top grades. You know what it takes to do well. Okay. So I strongly encourage you. This is your time to shine, right? Every day past the past first semester, the value of law preview diminishes slightly, right? It's like what is it, like an isotope, right? It cuts in half, right? The value is never completely gone. Let me put it that way. But it does diminish as it goes along. Okay. So I strongly encourage you to treat your first semester like that is the most important academic grades that you'll earn throughout your entire year or throughout your entire law school career, because it is, right? It sets the tone, all right, for the entire, your entire legal career. All right, that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it right now. Effective time management. All right. Anybody else? Let's see this. My professor prepared. So Alexis is saying, prepared us for the midterm with an ungraded essays, and they treated it like graded essays and mandatory biweekly connected multiple choice questions. But I feel like I had an advantage because I wasn't writing an essay format like everybody else. I was using headings and using CRAC. CIPRO, we had to examine either short answer or multiple choice every week. Awesome. All right, cool. Yeah, so CRAC is great. Right, that you're putting a conclusion first, you're identifying the rules. I'm assuming that your A is standing for arguments. It's not application, and I'll talk about the difference in a minute. And then you're restating your conclusion. So Alexis, you felt good about how your midterms went then?
Yeah, I have most of my midterms back, and I've gotten 90% or 100 most or all of them.
All right, so Alexis, I will shamelessly hunt you down for testimonial next year for law preview.
Okay.
Hey, can you shut up? Sorry, guys. These dogs. I don't know what we were thinking. It was a bad idea, right? Puppies sound like it's like children. They sound like a good idea. Another bad idea. Don't have kids, okay? They will suck you dry and they will give you no joy in the process. So, and I know your parents say they love you. They feel the same way. Trust me. All right. Any other questions about effective time management before I move on? Any questions, guys? Nothing? Who joined with the iPhone? Somebody else joined. iPhone 1, 2, 3. No? Okay. They're probably just listening in, lurking on us. All right. So we're going to go to the call to question. This is hopefully something that's not familiar or not unfamiliar to you. Professors, especially if you're taking a midterm, hopefully they at least told you this. All right. But oftentimes they won't. All right. What I want you guys to be doing for every question that you read, whether it's a hypothetical, like a long essay question, or it's a multiple choice question, I need you to get used to identifying the call of the question, right? And reading that before you read the fact pattern. Okay. This is a very easy way to distinguish yourself from other people in the class. All right. If we take a look here, the hypothetical is about, somebody who gets, held up for with a gun, and then somebody jumps in, an undercover police officer jumps in and wrestles the gun out of the person's hands, and somebody gets shot. Okay, so if you read that hypothetical fact pattern, it's a great story. All right, but if you read it with an eye towards what the call to question is, you have been hired as a prosecutor for the city of Old York. Okay, now I'm a prosecutor. I'm not defending the party who was arrested for for whatever. I'm not a defense attorney. I am a prosecutor. That is a very, very different hat that I'm being asked to wear than any other. I'm not a judge. I'm the prosecutor. All right. List any charges you would consider initiating against X, and after anticipating any defenses raised by X, opine about the likelihood of the success of each charge. Whoa. All right. That question is completely loaded. right? You can see that by reading the call to question first, I understand my job, I understand the role that I play, all right? And I'm being told exactly what I should be doing. I should be identifying as many charges as I would consider, all right? And then anticipating defenses by the defendant, opining about the success of the likelihood of success of each charge. You see how helpful that is? Right? You're not reading it as a story of, whoa, this is a crazy story. This guy got held up and the guy jumps out dressed in gang colors and he's an undercover cop and he shoots this guy in the foot, yada, 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 yada. Like you're doing it with a focused eye, laser focus, right? On what your role is and what you're being asked to do. This is huge. This is huge. This is going to distinguish you from, again, probably 10 or 15% of the class who doesn't do this, right? You're automatically putting yourself in a position to excel, all right? Simply by being focused and, and efficient as you're reading these questions. So that's the call of the question. It's really not that hard, but it's, we added a step 2 because, following the time piece, it's clearly the most important piece, right? And you'll see here, like, here's a hypothetical fact pattern, attached to a multiple choice question, right? As the new local prosecutor, okay, now I'm the new local prosecutor, right? Which charges would you initiate against X based on your likelihood of success? Okay, so here are my various charges, right? So now I know that, I know my role and I know what the question is that I'm being asked. So let me go back and reread this hypothetical fact pattern or read it for the first time with an eye towards which of the charges I'll bring with the most likelihood for success. Okay? Make sense? Call to question is very simple, all right? It's really just finding the call to question, reading it first, and then reading the hypothetical fact pattern attached to it. All right, any questions on that? Okay. So this is where, this is what distinguishes top students from students who don't do as well, right? And it's identifying and framing disputes. Now, you probably heard this during the first law preview class with exam taking with Tom Holm, when we did it online, right? But it probably didn't make as much sense as it may now. All right. So what I want you guys to do is really understand that, you cannot attack a hypothetical fact pattern as a whole. All right. It's like trying to eat a porterhouse steak in one bite. All right. It doesn't work. You got to chop it up, right, and chew. All right. So what I want you guys to think about is, rather than trying to spot issues, and that's something that people say all the time. Oh, you got to spot issues. You got to issue spot. This is what we're going to do. We're going to issue spot. If you just issue spot on the exam, you'll get an A. Why can't you just issue spot? What I want you to do on my exam is to issue spot. All right. What the hell does that mean? All right. And, I get really nervous about people who use that word and pigeonhole themselves into only focusing on issues. Okay. So in law preview, when I was writing the exam taking section, I had everybody, and I asked professors this, I was like, you guys are talking about issue spotting, like not a really good way to think about this for somebody who is uninitiated in the law, right? Heading into their first set of exams, right? Giving them, words like, oh, just issue spot isn't all that helpful. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Like, how would you rephrase it? And I'm like, well, why wouldn't we talk about spotting disputes, right? And disputes being causes of action, right? Spotting questions of law. And a dispute can be a cause of action. It can be a defense, all right? But spotting an overall dispute, and a hypothetical fact pattern is going to, you'll be keyed in on the fact that you're going to your contracts class, right? And you're looking for causes of action that spring from your contracts course, right? There's not very many of them, to be honest with you. Like breach of contract, right? A cause of action for breach of contract. That, if you haven't figured that one out, that's pretty much the only one. You might have something coming out of quasi contract, right? Quantum merit, right? Or and if you don't get there, don't worry. You might have, some people say, well, there was no contract, but we'll bring a cause of action using promissory estoppel. That could be used as a cause of action, right? But the overwhelming number of causes of action coming out of your contracts class is breach of contract. And property and torts are much different, right? They'll have multiple causes of action that you're going to learn throughout the semester. You might learn, it's easy enough to talk about. You probably, if you had torts already, you probably had all of your intentional torts. So you're going to have, battery, assault, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, all those intentional torts. Or you might have, negligence, right? As a cause of action. All right. But whatever it is, framing a dispute is a lot easier, right, than framing a particular issue. Because remember, what an issue is at its base level, right? An issue is, use the word, something the parties will take issue with. All right. Something the parties will take issue with. And most notably, it's not whether there is a battery, right? It's not, the issue is not what, I guess the issue in terms of framing the dispute could be whether there was a battery committed by A against B, right? That's the way you frame the dispute. But the issue would be whether A had the requisite intent to cause a battery. That's the issue, right? The issue usually relates not to the overall dispute, but to the element of a dispute. All right. And that's why I think framing disputes and identifying disputes is a better way to think about, structuring your exam than to try to spot issues. Because if you're able to identify the dispute by walking through the elements and seeing which elements survive and fail, you'll have spotted the issue. All right. Does that make sense? I want to stop there because I don't want to confuse you. And I need to get a yes, that makes sense, or Don, you just confused the hell out of me. And I'll try to restate it. It makes sense? Thanks, Mahi. Thumbs up. Anybody else? Anybody else alive? Are they listening? No? Oh, thank you, Alexis. Oh, thank you, Sapphire. All right. So I'll assume that we have a quorum here. And we've got, oh, there goes Matthew. All right. So everybody understands. All right. We're great. Oh, go ahead, Gene. Let's hear. Jean. Sorry, Jean.
I didn't know how to do the thumbs up. So I just raised my hand.
Oh, good. You give me a high five. All right, good. That's not a hand raise. Great. I appreciate it. I need that kind of look. It's hard doing this, man. I'm not looking at anybody's faces. I'm not looking at anybody like smiling back at me. I feel like my energy is just I'm putting it all out in the ether, and I'm just hoping that I'm connecting with you guys. So thank you. I like a high five, a thumbs up, or just an overall I don't know, a standing ovation. Want to do something good, please. But for you guys to understand this is critical, right? And I promise you, I guarantee you, 95% of your class is not thinking like this. Is not thinking about writing and identifying and framing disputes. Okay. So how do you frame a dispute? All right. First, you have to spot the parties to the dispute, right? Who are the parties that are going to actually be in conflict? All right. Now, a party can be actual people, like a natural person, or artificial entities. It doesn't matter. All right. But obviously, you're not going to have, every dispute has to have, like, and I'm thinking about in terms of even in criminal law, but in civil disputes, you're going to have, private parties on either side of the V, right? Party A versus party B. In criminal law, you'll have the state versus the defendant. Okay. But you want to identify who the parties are. Okay. And recognizing that they're not always going to be natural people. All right. And then identifying things that are going to be obvious, hopefully, from the fact pattern. First of all, you sometimes might just want to work backwards. Who was harmed, right? Who could be liable, or who? Let's say if you're able to identify a party that's been harmed, good. You've identified a party to dispute. Okay, then for anybody who's been harmed, who harmed them, right? And can you identify the harm producing act or omission? It doesn't always have to be something that they've done. It can be something that they failed to do, right? If it's in a contracts case, the omission could be performance. They failed to perform in a timely manner or do something, right? In a negligence case, they failed to exercise reasonable care, right? But there's going to be some kind of an act that produces the act of the harm. And then if you find out who that produced that, who either, did the act or failed to do the act, right, that produced the harm, then you've got another party on the other side of the B, all right? And then what you want to do is identify the legal theory, the black letter law, right? The legal theory that the party is going to assert to redress the harm, okay? So you identify the parties to the dispute, and then you're going to identify who was harmed, and then who was who can rightfully be blamed. And it's not always just one person, right? And we'll talk about the hypothetical that we have coming in a moment, right? It can be several different people are causing a harm. In terms of providing bad care or breaching a standard of care towards somebody. So there might be multiple parties on one side of a V that are harming this one individual. And we'll talk about an example of that in a moment. All right. And then what you want to do is identify the legal theory that the person is going, the party that got harmed would assert, right? Not the arguments that they're going to make, right? But just the overall general legal theory. Right? Okay, I'm in my torts class. I've got all these legal theories, these causes of action that I've been learning throughout the semester. I've got a whole tool belt full of them, right? Let me read this hypothetical fact pattern. Oh, this person was harmed. Bam, that looks like a negligence. Oh, this person was harmed. Bam, that looks like false imprisonment. Oh, bam, this person was harmed. Bam, that looks like an assault. All right. And I'm going to label them as such. All right. So, the hypothetical that we have here, I think that you probably might remember it from your practice questions in the law preview course, was this child is in the backseat of the car. Cindy goes to Prince Burger Prince, right? Orders a Happy Meal. She gets some kind of a doll in the Happy Meal. The head comes off, it gets stuck in her throat, and then all hell proceeds to happen, right? And basically, as a torts question, you're being asked to represent, again, if you're looking at the call to question, it's right here at the end, right? Arthur retains you to represent Cindy, and discuss and evaluate the various claims that Cindy can assert. Okay, so great. This is awesome, right? You now know that you represent not Arthur, but Cindy, right? The young girl, right? And as her attorney, you're going to go after everybody who's got a deep enough pocket to right the wrongs that Cindy has experienced in this hypothetical fact pattern. And if you remember, like this kid, poor Cindy, right? She chokes. They stick something down her throat. It breaks off in her mouth. She cracks some teeth. The doctor tries to do the Heimlich maneuver. He breaks her ribs. Like, it's it's all mayhem, right? Yeah, shit like that happens, Diana. All right, it doesn't it? Like like it's never clean and easy when somebody gets hurt in a hospital. So so then if you look at the way that I would want you to frame these disputes, right? I would say that if you were going to chart this, and I don't recommend that you be doing this on your exam because you don't have enough time to do so, but it lends itself pretty easily here. You look at the harm, right? Okay, Cindy had broken ribs, right? Who was the victim? The person who suffered the harm is Cindy. Who is the harm inflicting party? Dr. Green. How did he do it? He performed the Heimlich maneuver. If Cindy had to sue Dr. Green, what theory in torts will we rely on? Medical malpractice, right? I'm not asking you to prove anything. I'm not asking you to make any arguments here. I'm just saying if we're gonna try to frame these disputes, right, and identify and try to break down a hypothetical fact pattern and into questions that you're going to then answer, right? Because that's the other cool thing about the law school exam is you basically get to write the question that you answer. You're going to do this for every possible cause of action that Cindy has, because again, you're her attorney, right? And you are suing everybody who possibly harmed her, including, look at this, Arthur and Betty, her parents, right? Like, oh wow, Arthur wasn't expecting that when they hired you as her attorney. And they're like, whoa, wait, what? Why you're suing us? Yeah, I'm suing you because you guys suck as parents, and you gave a age appropriate a toy to your daughter that was not age appropriate, and I'm going to say that's negligence and failure to supervise, right? And Arthur's like, hold on for a second, can we fire you? And he's like, no, I'm Cindy's attorney. So again, this chart is going to be done pretty much almost in your head on an exam. And this is why a mastery of the black letter law, the understanding of the legal theory, a quick recall of every legal theory that you've learned in your torts class is going to come out helpful for when you're framing these disputes, right? But then for, what you're going to do is this the same thing before? Yeah, this is the same. Here we go. Sorry. I think this is wrong. Yeah, this is a duplicate slide. Let me just take that out. Oh, take that out, I meant. All right. So, here you have identify and frame the disputes. Now let's actually put this into words. All right. We've got the broken ribs. We've got Cindy. We've got Dr. Green, who performed the Heimlich maneuver, and we're going to say that he committed malpractice, medical malpractice. All right. A good example of the dispute would be whether Cindy, and here's a way that you can do the key as you go along, right, to help your professor. Abbreviate Cindy with C, right? Can recover against Dr. Green, G, for medical malpractice. There's your legal theory. When he broke her ribs while performing the Heimlich maneuver, backed up by facts. All right. A bad dispute, all right, would be whether Cindy can, statement of the dispute would be whether Cindy can recover against Dr. Green for medical malpractice. Way too broad, right? Because if you go back up to this chart, there's other medical malpractice things that Cindy can bring against Dr. Green. And we're going to distinguish the performance of the Heimlich maneuver from dispute number 2 that we're going to address when he used the medical device that broke off in her mouth. All right. So if you framed the dispute as whether Cindy can recover against Dr. Green for medical malpractice, it's overbroad. It's going to be really hard for you to answer that question succinctly and concisely, right? But by adding the facts, when he broke her ribs while performing the Heimlich maneuver, you've narrowed down the scope of what you're applying medical malpractice for. And guess what? Again, what I just said before, you wrote a question that didn't appear before that now you get to answer. So when you're just answering this dispute, your professor is like, okay, I understand it. Jean now is answering this specific question about medical malpractice with relation to the Heimlich maneuver. I assume, hopefully, fingers crossed, when I get to dispute number 2, he's going to have whether Cindy can recover against Dr. Green for medical malpractice when the device he stuck in her mouth broke all her teeth, right? But you can see why this is better than that. This is overbroad because now we're going to have to essentially break medical malpractice into 2 different parts to answer. When he did the Heimlich maneuver, and also when he did the I apologize. I'm having a senior moment here. When he stuck the device in her mouth and broke her teeth. Okay, this is really broad, right? This is horrible, right? When Cindy, whether Cindy can recover against Dr. Green and tort, like, please, come on. But that's essentially, again, like trying to consume a porterhouse steak in one bite, right? This is cutting off a small chunk of porterhouse steak, all right, putting it on your fork, dipping it in A1 sauce, because yes, that's the way I have my steak, all right, and putting it in your mouth and chewing, right? Trying to do this is biting off more than you can chew. Okay? All right. Before I move on to identifying arguments, I need you to just, again, please give me some kind of sign, people, all right, that you're alive, you're well, and that you understand what I just said about framing disputes. All right? Were you thinking about this way before? Or, is this sort of like new to you? Right? Anybody? No? I assume you're all alive. Thank you for those thumbs up. I appreciate it. Jean, you were just about to say something, so don't be shy. Make me feel like I.
Yeah, that's the way I think about questions, and
Okay.
it also helps thinking about it that way for lawyering when I have my when I have to write an essay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly right. Like, if you look at the the memos or the the briefs that you're writing in your whatever, it's the lawyering fundamentals class or your legal writing class, it's you're given a hypothetical fact pattern. You're told the story, right? You're supposed to write a memo to a senior partner or whoever, right, or the judge in the case, and your issue statement, right, is essentially a question that you're going to then answer, right? What I'm trying to do here is set you up with, when you're encountering a hypothetical fact pattern like this, where there's a lot of stuff going on, all right? I'm trying to set you up for success by breaking this down into distinct questions, right? Distinct, very easily answered questions that parse apart the entire hypothetical into various causes of action or legal theories, as we should call it. Okay. All right, good. All right, so now we're talking about identifying arguments. We're almost to the end of this. All right, step 4. I'm on time here. Yep, it's 11:33, so I'm doing well on my time here. So again, I have to say this. I know that you probably heard it before. If you haven't heard the statement, it depends, right, from your law professor in class, you're probably not going to law school, right? You're in the wrong building. All right. So has everybody, like, when somebody raises their hand in class, when Diana, let's use Diana because she was the hand popper, right? When she was like, professor, look at me, and asked a question, and have you all heard your professor say, well, it depends? Yes? Thumbs up? Good. I'm just making sure you're going to law school. You're not stuck in a medical school somewhere, right? All right, great. Sapphire says yes. Yeah, iPhone person who we haven't heard from yet says yes. Awesome. Okay. Good. All right. That means you're in law school. All right. And that means that it depends, right? The right answer depends. It depends. Hey, what? It depends, right? This is how we make our money as lawyers, right? This is great. This is the beautiful thing about being a lawyer. Because when things depend, it's a gray area. You get to spend some money on lawyers, and eventually that's going to come in handy for you when you want to feed your kids, right? If you have them, or put braces on their teeth. All right. So I need you to stop looking for the right answer, right? I want you to think there's no right answer here, and that's okay, right? Because your professors, the only way they can really test, without saying, please give me the 4 elements of a battery, right? They'll never do that, right? They don't care about that. They know that you are walking decks of flashcards, just walking around memorizing there are 4 elements to an enforceable battery claim, and this is it. Here are 3 elements to an enforceable contract. Here are the 5 elements of adverse possession, right, in property, whatever. Okay, they know that you're just walking around with all these elements, facts, legally significant facts. That's all elements are. They know that you're just walking around with all these elements in your head. All right, but they're not going to ask you what they are, because that doesn't really know whether you know what to do with them. They're going to ask you very specific questions that are purposely ambiguous. All right, they're going to create a hypothetical fact pattern where the answer for you is going to be, professor, it depends. All right, you get to finally throw back in her face what she's been telling you all semester. Well, Jennifer, welcome, by the way. You're a little late, all right? But it's being recorded, so I highly recommend you go back and if you want to see what we covered before, because we're on step 4 of 5. But Jennifer, if you really want to stick it to your professor now, right? If you've had enough of her, in her, condescending tone the entire damn semester, confusing the hell out of you, when she asks you a question on the exam, won't it be? Well, I mean, think about the satisfaction that you'll get to say, professor, it depends. All right, it depends who should win here. All right, and had you written a better exam question, it would be clear. Don't say that. I'm joking. All right. But if there wasn't such ambiguity in your exam question, in your hypothetical, I'd be able to give you a better answer. But as of right now, I get to be the law professor here, and it depends. All right. It depends. Okay. So stop looking for the right answer and identify, try to identify, what would possibly be the best answer, right? And it's not based on, simply the facts. It's going to be based on the arguments that either party to the dispute is going to be making. All right, who has the stronger arguments, right? And if we had to grade an exam, right, and you got there was a certain number of points for identifying and framing the dispute. Okay, there's a certain number of points of using the operative rule or naming the operative legal theory that you're going to use to provide that, to answer that question, right? And then the arguments and the conclusion, right? If it's worth 10 points, those 4 points are worth 10 points. Framing, the dispute, maybe a point, maybe half a point, right? Identifying the operative legal theory that you're going to use, right? And stating what that legal theory is and the elements of that legal theory, half a point at most, right? The conclusion is probably worth nothing, right? But you have to give one, all right? Arguments is worth 8 or 9 points, all right? Identifying the arguments the parties are going to make to say whether this legal theory that you identified in the frame dispute is going to survive or fail. That is where you're making your money on your exam, all right? Those are your money questions, okay? So let's talk about the disputes or the types of arguments that you're going to make, all right? So there are 3 types of arguments that you're going to make in support of or against the legal theory that you framed in your dispute, right? I'll say it one more time because this is really important, all right? Because this is a building block approach. I'm trying to make this so I can explain things in simple terms so I can layer these complex things on later on, all right? You are going to use 3 types of arguments: a factual argument, a legal argument, or not all together, or a policy argument in order to say whether the legal theory in your framed dispute should survive or fail. Okay. So what are factual arguments? Okay. Factual arguments are looking at the hypothetical fact pattern, right? And identifying whether all the elements are present. Okay. Again, elements are nothing more than legally significant facts. Every time your professor says element, every time you hear somebody say element, all they're saying are facts, right? If you are able to prove 3 facts, that Don acted intentionally, that Don caused bodily contact, and that bodily contact caused harmful or offensive touching between myself and you are able to establish a prima facie case for battery, the legal theory of battery. But notice those elements are simply facts. All right. Was there intent? Was there bodily contact? Was the contact harmful or offensive? All right. Those are fact issues. All right. If you really want to get crazy about it, if you were in Civ Pro, right, the jury is deciding whether the facts are present or deciding the elements of the cause of action. The judge is framing the dispute in our, in our court, or I'm not framing the dispute, but telling you what the law is. In our court, we use a 3-part test for battery or a 4-part test for battery. Here are the 4 elements or facts that make up the battery test. Jury, go find out whether those things exist. Okay. Right. Factual arguments. So there are types, 3 different types of factual arguments that you're going to encounter. All right. First one, different factual interpretations. Okay. So you'll have a hypothetical fact pattern that has words that might be used interchangeably in different situations. Are you guys taking the for contracts? I think there was I forget the name of the case. Diana, maybe you remember it. But I loved it because it was, the entire case was, arguing over the definition of a chicken. What does a chicken mean? Right? Because in one circumstance, I guess if you're a butcher, a chicken means this, right? If you're a farmer, a chicken means this, right? And, the subject matter of the contract was a chicken. And the parties had different factual interpretations of what a chicken meant, right? The example that I have up on the screen is probably a good one. If you're talking to a baker, a dozen is what? 13, right? If you're talking to, a person who's, produces eggs, a dozen is what? 12, right? Oh yeah, that's it. Frail and important. Yep. The chicken case. Right. See, I'm not crazy. All right. I remember. And the sad thing is that was 30 years ago. All right. That was 30 years ago that I read that case. Like, or the case with the kid who pulls out the chair. Like, you think, oh, I just have to get through this, this semester and I'll never have to deal with this stuff again. This shit is going to be going through your head all the time. You're gonna be like, oh wow, that's like the chicken case. So that's like the Pearson versus Post. So that, these are all things that you'll never forget, right, during your first year of law school, these cases. So yes, so different factual interpretations. You're going to argue, parties are going to argue, hey, look, I interpret chicken to mean this, right? Well, I interpret chicken to mean this. Professor, it depends on how this case comes out because there are different interpretations of the word of chicken. All right. So there's different factual interpretations. These are types of factual arguments that you're going to regularly see. All right. The most obvious one is vague or ambiguous facts, where the professor just gives you just enough, almost enough to say it's present, but not enough. Right. I think in one of the hypothetical fact patterns that I gave you for a property question in law preview, it was the question was whether the fact pattern it was most of 15 years. Well, if the statutory period for adverse possession is 10 years, most of 15 years is pretty important, right? Whether they held the property continuously, right, without interruption. All right, because if it happens in year 7 that the continuousness gets interrupted, well, then the clock starts over, and then 8 years later, they haven't satisfied the 10-year test, right? So vague or ambiguous facts like that are things that the parties will argue to say whether a fact or an element is present or not. All right. And again, as a plaintiff, you're always trying to present, these are the hypothetical, here's the legal theory, here are the elements or facts that I need to prove to back up that legal theory. And as a defendant, your goal is to knock out one of those elements. Your best defense, all right? Your best defense is not a defense, all right? Your best defense is to be like, hey, I don't have to really say anything because the plaintiff failed to prove their case. I have defenses, don't you worry, professor. I could always give you those. But I don't even think the plaintiff gets to the point where I would even have to talk about my defenses, because this case should be dismissed summarily right now before I raise my defenses, because they failed to prove every element. And therefore, because they can't prove the prima facie case, their case must be dismissed because you can't grant any relief on it. All right. And the third kind, and this is another obvious one, but it doesn't happen as much as you might think. The fact is simply just missing, right? Now, it might be it's missing because the professor wants you to try to supplant it, all right, with a legal test or standard. And I'm going to talk about that now. All right. So legal arguments. All right. What are legal arguments that you're going to make? A legal argument is anything that you have to do in order to prove or disprove the presence of an element. All right. So a legal test or standard, remember we talked about before, my intent, right? How the hell do you know what I'm thinking? Right? Most of the time, if you ask my wife, you don't even want to know what I'm thinking. All right. She thinks I'm crazy. Like I'm walking around, dancing around, thinking about like, she's like, what are you singing in your head today? I'm like, oh, it's Beyonce. I'm thinking, or Lizzo. I love I'm always singing like these different songs in my head. All right. You don't know what I'm thinking. All right. How would you be able to tell if absent from the hypothetical fact pattern, if you wanted to try to recover against me for battery, right? Absent me in the hypo saying, I intend to strike you, right? Having direct evidence of my intent, how the hell are you going to prove intent? You're going to use a legal test, right? Or a standard, right? And that's where a missing fact, right? Hey, I'll the problem here, professor, is whether Don can recover against Diana for battery, right? Clearly there was harmful contact. Clearly there was bodily contact. Clearly it was harmful or offensive, right? Under the facts, but we don't know whether Diana was acting intentionally or not, whether she had an involuntary fit and she moved her arms and hit Don in the face, or whether she was like, hey, let me show you how I pack a punch, and she hits Don right in the chin and breaks his jaw. Okay. Because we don't know, we can't crawl into the recesses of pry open her head and look inside and tell us what Diana is thinking. But what the law has done is said, okay, well, when that happens, that's okay. When that happens, what we'll do is we'll provide people in the courts with rules, legal tests or standards that if proven, if you can prove a separate set of facts, elements, right, just facts, we'll presume that Diana had the requisite intent, right? If you can't really truly prove, Diana spits in my face, right? And who knows what I'm into, right? Who knows if I find that really truly offensive, or wow, that's pretty cool, right? Who knows? But I sue her for battery, saying I was deeply offended when Diana spit in my face. Well, how are you going to prove that I was offended? You're going to use a test, right? To that, reasonable people, whatever the test is that you've learned throughout your law school, your cases that say reasonable people who are spit in their face will be, shown that they are offended. therefore we'll create a presumption that Don was offended. Now, it's just a presumption, right? The law, everything, even if you're able to prove all of your elements of your cause of action, it doesn't say that you automatically win. It just creates a presumption which can be rebutted. Diana can be like, hey, listen, I'm going to call in witnesses, right, who say Don really gets off on people spitting in his face. He loves it, right? This was fantastic for him. He was not offended at all. All right. I'm not like that. All right. But, she can then rebut that presumption with a defense by saying, this is not true. And more facts will come in. Oh, you'll line up, people that Don knew from high school, people that Don knew from college, who he would go up to people at a party and be like, spit in my face. This is my thing. Right. So, that's, a legal test or a standard simply just creates a rebuttal presumption that establishes the existence of an element. Okay. This is important, guys. This is really important because a lot of what you're learning in your cases are not general causes of action. What a lot of you're seeing in your cases are these tests or standards to prove the existence of certain elements or facts. All right. Remember law school, fact school? You're going to fact school now. You're learning how to prove facts. Okay. Other legal arguments that you might have that you'll see, the general rule, right? Remember, I don't know if you remember from Law Preview when I used the example of grandma who was using the motorized wheelchair in the park, right? And she gets arrested and thrown in jail. And then, the judge then creates an exception to the general rule that motorized wheelchairs are allowed in the park, right? That's an exception to the general rule. It usually has its own elements, right? So this is another argument that somebody would, bring up, right? Similar to that is a defense, right? You're coming, I shoot you in the face, right? It looks like, let's say you don't die. It looks like a battery, right? I point it at you, I shoot you in the face, right? I stop you dead in your tracks. There is harmful or offensive contact. There's plenty of case law out there to say that or even better, let's just say you come at me, I punch you in the face. Okay. So it's direct evidence of harmful or offensive bodily contact. And I scream at the top of my lungs, I intend to hit you. Right. It looks like a slam dunk case for battery. But then I say, well, okay, that does look like a slam dunk case for battery. However, hello, Diana was coming at me with a knife. Right. This is self-defense. I have a justification here. And a defense is simply just another kind of cause of action. That's a defense with its own elements, all right? And it's a legal argument that you would present in support of or against the application of a rule, okay? Now, another thing that legal arguments that parties, that your classmates are not thinking of, and if you really want to know what separates the top 1 or 2% of the class from the bottom 98% of the class, it's this. All right. The next two things that we're going to talk about. Splits in the law. If you're learning throughout the semester, the majority rule, right? The majority jurisdiction, just to be clear, right? Most of the cases in contracts, property, and torts in criminal law are state law cases, right? So the majority jurisdiction versus the minority jurisdiction simply means most of the states out there, 26% or 26 or more, follow this general rule for battery, follow this general rule for murder, follow this general rule for breach of contract, follow this general rule for adverse possession. There are a few other jurisdictions who may follow a similar or entirely different rule, right? Either because the law evolved differently there, or sometimes what a minority jurisdiction is like, if we're looking at the evolution of law as a bunch of different branches on a tree, right? A minority jurisdiction might be like a new little nub of a branch, that's sort of sticking its head out, right, to become a whole new branch of the law. All right, maybe 20 or 30 years from now, the minority jurisdiction rule now may become the majority jurisdiction later on. Okay. You're also learning other splits in the law: model penal code versus common law, right? UCC in contract versus common law contract, right? A restatement section, right, for promissory estoppel, right, versus the common law promissory estoppel, right? And then sometimes there's a difference between state and federal law, probably not in your first year classes, not a lot of it, okay? Why I say this is what distinguishes the top 10% or the top 2% from the bottom 98% is if you're able to go into your law school exam, not only knowing the majority causes of action and defenses and legal tests, all right, but also the minority ones, right? You're able to show your professor, hey, I'm not just like all these other yokels over here who learn just the majority rule, right? Because what'll happen invariably, all right, is in the instructions or in the hypothetical fact pattern, right? You are going to become the prosecutor for the city of Old York, a fictitious city, right? The professor will say, like, you live in the state of flux, right? A fictitious state, right? You don't know what jurisdiction you're in. And I freaking promise you, people, all right, 98% of your class are only going to only apply the majority rule, or will only apply the model penal code, or will only apply the UCC rule, right? But you don't know if the state of flux has adopted the model penal code or adopted the UCC, or is in fact a majority jurisdiction, all right? So again, if your goal is to stick it to your professor, right, make her feel as, silly and stupid as she's made you feel all semester by, putting your hands on your hips and saying, well, professor, it depends, all right? It depends on what kind of a jurisdiction we're in. Professor, listen, I can answer this question for you. I'll give you the rule of battery. I'll give you the exceptions to the rule. I'll give you the defenses that are going to be raised. But you're not even telling me whether I'm going to give you actually a whole nother analysis as if we were in the majority jurisdiction, in the minority jurisdiction. Even if they come out the same, I'm going to tell you so. I'm telling you, if you do that, you're in the top 2% of exam takers. Okay? Does everyone understand what I'm talking about there? Yep. Good. All right, Mahi. Awesome. Jennifer, does that make sense to you, even though you came late? No? John? Thank you. All right, great. All right. The other piece and this is like the top half of 1%. All right. The other piece that is going to distinguish the top half of 1% versus the bottom 99.5% is when you sit there and say, professor, based on what you taught us this semester, and this is going to, really, you have to really know your professor to know whether she's going to like this or not. All right. But based on what you taught us this entire semester, I think it's time for a new rule. Right. And you only make this if you think your professor is going to be receptive to this. And this is doing some recon on your professor, right? One of the things that I talk about during law preview is, getting to know your professor by reading their law review articles, all right? A lot of the times, if you can get a hold of a work in progress, and so some of these professors will put their law review articles up on a server, I forget what it's called, but it's a place where you can see the actual problem that they're working on. Read those, because oftentimes they're advocating for the making of a new rule, right? That we haven't seen this hypothetical, we haven't seen these facts before. It's a crypto case, right? Like crypto is the big hot, ticket item right now in the world. And we don't know how to apply the securities law to cryptos. Are they securities? Are they commodities? What rules should we be applying? And your professor might be writing a law review article about that. If you're taking crypto 101, with your professor, which you aren't obviously, but if she's out there writing a question and putting out a question on your area of the law and is advocating for possibly a new rule, well, guess what? You're going to law school not because you're not a plumber, right? You're not just putting pipes together, right? You're trying to, if you're going to be a really good lawyer, you should be looking to advocate for changes in the law. And making a new rule of law is a great way of doing that, all right? This is not your primary argument. This is as an aside, based on this case and based on what you said in class, professor, and based on this nugget that I took from your law review article, I think this is an example of where a new law, a new rule comes out that could solve this problem. I want you guys to think about your fifth grade, when you were in fifth grade and you were taking piano lessons, all right? I had a piano teacher who came to our house every Friday, all right? I hated the piano. I'm tone deaf, all right? I don't know music from anything. I was lazy. I didn't really want to read the piano music. But your torts professor is like your piano teacher, all right? She's telling you how to hold your hands on the keys. She's telling you what the foot pedals do, all right? She's telling you how to read sheet music, right? Every one of the cases that you're reading is, a piece of music, right? And she's helping you through learning to play Happy Birthday, learning to play Three Blind Mice, learning to play Chopsticks, right? If you're getting to the exam, which is your recital at the end of the semester, right? And you're like all of your other classmates who are expecting to say, I'll get an A if I show my professor how well I play Three Blind Mice, or how well I learned to play Happy Birthday, right? I want you to get up there and be like, hey, professor, thanks for all of your legal instruction. Thanks for all of your instruction. However, I'm not like your average law student. I'm like the Lady Gaga of your class. I took all this piano lessons and I wrote my own original song. That's what this new piece is, making new law, all right? That is like a highly sophisticated law student, all right? Again, this is not your leadoff, right? This is just and as an aside, professor, knowing what I know about you and knowing what we learned in this class, here's way, if it were me, I would change the law, because I think it would make it a better, it always doesn't always apply either. Very, very sophisticated, but if you're looking to be in the top of your class, that's the kind of stuff you're doing. All right. All right. So we talked about legal arguments. We talked about, factual arguments, legal arguments. All right. You'll see this in the hypothetical fact pattern. We're going to talk about, like using, the tests. I just talked about that. How do we prove intent? How do we prove harmful or offensive? They're using different tests. All those are legal arguments. Okay. Used to prove a fact. They're used to prove an element is a fact. Legal tests or standards are used to prove a fact, right? You're not going to law school, you're going to fact school, okay? Let's talk about policy arguments really, really quick, okay? So policy arguments, if we had to, if we're ranking them, policy arguments are probably the weakest of all your arguments, okay? There's an old adage, right? If you don't have the facts, your fact arguments are the strongest, arguments that you can make. If you don't have the facts, you argue the law, right? And if you don't have the law on your side, then you argue public policy, okay? So legal arguments are, policy arguments are, looking at the rationale for why we have that rule and try to make an argument as to why that rationale does not exist on this facts. All right, on these facts. So going back to our case, with Cindy and Dr. Green, right? And she's trying to sue Dr. Green for medical malpractice because he performed the Heimlich maneuver, right? And broke some ribs. Okay, a policy argument there would be something like, look, it's really hard to argue like that, he didn't breach a duty of care to Cindy, right? If done properly, the Heimlich maneuver removes a foreign object from Cindy's throat, right? And shouldn't break her ribs. All right. However, do you, as a matter of public policy, do you really want, Dr. Green to act quickly and, service somebody who's in need, or, try to, position, Cindy, even though she's limp and she's like unconscious, in a way that would reduce the harm? Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the best of circumstances, you'd want Dr. Green to be doing everything he can to prevent, injury to Cindy's ribs, but sometimes that's not possible. Or even better, right? Like, hey, look, cut these doctors a break, man. Like, the reason why it's so goddamn expensive to go to the hospital right now is because all these doctors are, doing things. The only people who go to the hospital, guess what? They're sick, right? Sick people go to the hospital. They come to you with problems, all right? And, a doctor is simply there, or a nurse is simply there to try to help them out of their problem. And then we want to penalize them by taking action that, in the franticness of the situation, trying to, help this child breathe and remove a foreign object from her throat. You want to penalize him for, doing the Heimlich maneuver incorrectly. Like, if you do that, then it's just going to raise, his medical malpractice, insurance costs even more. And then guess what? For everybody who goes to the hospital, it's going to cost more. Like, we're in a vicious cycle right now. If I'm Dr. Green's doctor, or I'm sorry, lawyer, right? I'm arguing public policy. This is unconscionable that you would ever try to, hold poor Dr. Green, who's just doing his damn job, right? To to a higher standard of, of not breaking her ribs, even though he did his, public policy says that we shouldn't hold him liable in this case. That's a policy argument. Clearly it's weak, right? It's not as strong as a factual argument or a legal argument, but it is an argument, right? And the good thing is, like, there's only very few public policy arguments that you're probably picking up in every one of your classes right now. All right. So we're now, oh shoot, we're at 12:07. I apologize. Okay. So before I move on to organizing and drafting your response, any questions? Are we okay with identifying arguments, the three types of arguments that you guys are going to make in support of or against the application of the rule that you've identified, or the the legal theory that you've identified in your frame dispute? Thumbs up. Good. Good. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Very helpful. Look, I love that. Thank you, Sapphire. I feel very I feel appreciated. Thank you, Sapphire. I needed that. Okay. Okay. So now let's talk really quickly about organizing response. Okay. I talked about before about, spending a quarter of your time outlining and analyzing the hypothetical fact pattern, and then 45 or 3/4 of the time actually writing the answer. All right. So outlining the answer is a really important step. All right. Because what it's going to do is it's going to, on a piece of scrap paper, right? You're going to quickly, and let me also say, like, I say scrap paper now, it might be in the margins of your exam, right? As a 2L and a 3L, you might never even do this step again. You might just do like highlighting and underlining, and then all of a sudden be able to do this all stuff in your head. But what you're going to do is you're going to want to identify the dispute between the parties. You're going to identify the operative legal theory that the harmed party is going to assert, right? And then you're going to identify any factual, legal, or policy arguments both parties will make, to prove whether or not that legal theory should survive or fail. Okay, so that's all we're doing here. And if you remember back from Law Preview, what I designed was hopefully helpful. I have the flip-flop tree, right? I have the initiating party. Usually that's the plaintiff, right? The person who's initiating the claim. The reason why I called it initiating was because in Civ Pro, it's, it could be the movement, right? So the defendant could move the court. They would be the initiating party, right? And then anybody, opposing the motion would be the opposing party. But, oftentimes initiating party really just translates in plaintiff, and then opposing party translates into defendant. But Civ Pro threw a little bit of a wrinkle in my plan there. But it worked out well, because then I got to call it the flip-flop tree, using the initiating party on the top, I, right? And the flop is the O on the bottom. The opposing party is making the same kind of arguments, all right? So for the initiating party on the top, I want to have factual, legal, or policy arguments they're going to use in support of the application of legal theory, all right? And then on the opposite side of, whoa, I just got away from myself there. On the opposite side, I want to have any, arguments against the application of fact, against their legal argument here, against their policy argument here, right? So this is their prima facie case, right, being stated here. And then I want to have any factual, legal, or policy arguments that prevent them from making their prima facie case. Again, that is your best defense, all right? However, if I can't, then as the opposing party, I'm going to assert defenses or justifications here, and that's my prima facie case for my defense and my or my justification, right? And then this is where I'm going to make I'm sorry, I apologize. This is my prima facie case, right? That I'm going to be making because I'm under the opposing party for my defense. And then these are going to be the factual arguments, the plaintiff would make, or the initial party would make, against my defense, the legal argument against my defense, the policy argument against my defense. Make sense? Yes? Right? So we're seeing this, at work here, right? Here, whether Cindy can recover against Dr. Green for medical malpractice when he broke her ribs while performing the Heimlich maneuver. That's our framed dispute. All right. So, we're going to, the initiating party, Cindy, right, who's going to bring her claim, initiate her claim, is going to, say that Cindy, she's going to put all the facts in where, he might have violated his duty, right? She's going to put all of the, the facts in, and maybe, and look, even a legal argument here, right? That, a res ipsa test to create a presumption of negligence. Because I think if we remember correctly, if you go back and read the hypothetical fact pattern, she was unconscious in the operating room. So Cindy, who's only 5 anyway, wouldn't know how her ribs got broken, right? All she knows is she woke up with a sore throat because the doll head was removed and some broken ribs. And the presumption is res ipsa, like if everything was in the control of Dr. Green, all the facts are let Dr. Green, prove that there wasn't a breach of that duty. All right. But notice, like in this one, we don't have, I mean, there could be, like, we could say, again, Dr. Green's going to assert the policy argument here. Hey, as a defense, like, even if you find that she's entitled to recover here, as a policy argument, do we really want her to, right? As a society, do we really want our doctors to be held more liable than they already are? It's going to hurt everybody in our society. I don't know, maybe not. All right. But you'll go ahead and you'll organize your response, after you've outlined it like that. And again, I don't want you spending a ton of time outlining, and creating these flip-flop trees. They're going to be short, quick little things for you to identify and know that this is the dispute that I'm bringing. Here's the arguments, in support of or against the application of the legal theory, whether it's a factual argument, a legal argument, or a policy argument, or whether it's defense, a factual argument, a legal argument, a policy argument to establish those elements. All right. And then here's just the simple way for you to organize your answers. All right. And I can't emphasize this enough. All right. Your vision of your professor has to be, it's December 24th, it's 2 a.m. She picked up your exam. She wants a really easy exam to read. All right. You will notice that and I encourage you to go back and look at the hypothetical answers that the answers that we have to the hypothetical fact patterns in the exam taking book. But these questions, or these, your essay is like no other essay you've ever written before, all right? It is simply dispute number one, a 1-sentence paragraph that describes the dispute as a framed dispute, all right? New paragraph. Rule, all right? This is the DRAC approach, but you can do CRAC or whatever you want, all right? As long as you're doing arguments, all right? Rule, all right? You're going to insert 1 or 2 sentences that states the rule. Battery consists of 3 elements, harmful, intentional, bodily contact that was harmful or offensive, whatever the test is, all right? And you're going to enumerate them, right? A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3. You're going to label them, okay? And then arguments, all right? Your professors who say they want IRAC and they want you to apply the law to the facts, they're lying to you, all right? They don't want application. They want arguments, all right? So for every single factual, legal, or policy argument that you identify in your flip-flop tree, you're going to state a different paragraph, right? So the first reason I want you to enumerate the elements, right? The facts that you need to prove in order to establish your rule, your cause of action, or your defense, is because I want you to be able to say, hey, professor, clearly here, harmful or offensive exists because of these 5 facts. Don was bleeding from his mouth when Diana hit him in the face. Don broke his jaw. Don clearly suffered harm. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, right? And also, clearly from this, from these facts, Diana hit Don in the mouth with her fist, right? Clearly there was bodily contact, right? Diana, she doesn't look like, she looks pretty nice, but she packs quite a punch, that one, all right? You don't want to go up against her in court, all right? She's vicious, all right? So clearly Diana, has satisfied, like Don clearly can satisfy the harmful or offensive or the bodily contact, all right? We're just going to quickly dismiss of those elements and those facts. Where we're going to battle, professor, is on Diana's intent. Diana's going to say that she had an epileptic seizure or some kind of fit, right? That she involuntarily moved her hands. And, that is present in the fact pattern. Or Don's going to say, no, she specifically intended this, right? Because of what she told her friend, like, watch me hit Don in the face, all right? Whatever it is, that's where the battle is going to take place. And you're going to have arguments for and against the application of that rule. And then again, at the very end, you have well, it depends, professor. It's the conclusion, right? It depends on whether you believe, Diana and her cheating and lying words, right? Or you believe Don, who's like an altar boy, right? In the nicest and purest of forms, all right? But you're going to do that for every single dispute that you identify. And then once you've resolved dispute number 1, you're going to move to dispute number 2. And you're going to move to dispute number 3. And the only thing I caution you about when you're doing it through this approach, right, is treating all these disputes as separate and distinct disputes, but also recognizing that if you find a certain way, right, on dispute number 1 that would extinguish a claim to just talk about dispute number 3, make sure that you don't do that, right? Just say like, hey, it's unclear here whether Diana and Don should win, right? But and then when you get to dispute number 3, be like, hey, dispute number 3, whether Don can recover against Diana for intentional infliction of emotional distress, because after she committed a battery, he's now left looking like this, right? I should be wearing a beekeeper's mask, right? Because I'm so hideous, right? But if you found out she didn't commit battery, then intentional infliction of emotional distress doesn't work, right? So you want to say like, hey, depending on what you find in dispute number 1, there is also a claim for for intentional infliction of emotional stress, because if you found in dispute number 1 that she committed a battery, then this is what happens from that, all right? So I just don't want you to extinguish disputes later on that are going to earn you points if you quickly arrive at a conclusion as to who should win in an early dispute. That's it. All right. And I think we're there. I think we're at the end. All right. So no flowery, intro paragraph, no overarching conclusion at the end. It's just dispute number 1, analyze. Dispute number 2, analyze. Dispute number 3, analyze. When the proctor yells time, you throw down your pencil, you jump up for joy, and you say like, hey, I did it. I'm going to crush all of you people. I got the A. All right. Or maybe don't do that. I mean, you still have to make friends in law school. All right. Please acknowledge that you're still alive. I know that we went over by 20 minutes. I apologize. It's Saturday. Helpful, unhelpful, new to you. Holy shit. Why didn't you tell us this in law preview, Don? I think we did, but you might not remember it. But it might be a little bit more timely for you now. Good? Everybody good? Everybody feels good? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to take your silence as acceptance. All right. And feel like I've done my job. Diana, anything else you need from me?
No, this was awesome. I will send the recording to you once it's downloaded to my computer. If you could upload it to the website, that would be great.
I think I've got a couple of other things to upload there too. So yes, I will do that. I
Perfect.
apologize. I've been remiss, but I will definitely get that up there. And then we can send a link around to. Is there a way that we can send a link to maybe not like from Melvin is or no? It's not.
Oh yeah, they don't have it like that set up.
Okay, got it.
Awesome. Well,
All right.
thanks
Well,
so
listen.
much.
Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, people. All right. And if you haven't decided what you're doing, let me just tell you, you're going to the library and you're studying because exams are coming around the corner. Absent like some kind of like crazy nuclear war from our friend over in Russia, that shit's happening. It's happening in December. So don't wish it was different. It's not going to make it any so. So like make sure you go out there and really start your outlines and get ready for these things. All right. All right. Diana, take it easy. Thanks so much for hosting this. And I always love doing them.
Thank you again. And thanks everyone. See you soon.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.